The sound hit before anyone could process what happened. A sharp crack. Skin against skin. The kind of sound that makes your whole body tense up even if you're not the one getting hit. Inside Hamel, the fanciest Korean fusion restaurant in all of Manhattan, everything went dead silent. Nari Yoon's hand, covered in diamonds that cost more than most people's yearly salary, had just connected with Zora Pemberton's face. Hard. So hard that 3 waiters standing nearby actually flinched like they felt it too. The sound bounced off the imported marble walls. It slid across the hand-painted silk screens. It touched every single person in that room. And everybody froze. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died right in the middle of sentences. 50 of Manhattan's richest, most powerful people just sat there like somebody hit pause on a movie. All of it, because of 3 tiny drops of red wine. 3 drops of Chateau Margaux on Nari's $8,000 white Valentino blouse. That's it. 3 drops you could barely even see. But here's the thing nobody saw coming. Zora Pemberton didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't swing back. Instead, her right hand came up real slow. But not to touch her cheek where it was already burning hot and turning red. No. Her fingers went straight to the small silver cross hanging around her neck. That cross had been in her family for 4 generations. It went all the way back to Reconstruction, back to her great-great-grandmother who bought it with the first money she ever earned as a free woman. Her grandma had pressed it into her palm 6 months ago, right there on her deathbed, whispering words Zora would never forget. Now Zora closed her eyes. Her lips moved just a little bit. Silent words. A silent prayer. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. And when those dark brown eyes opened back up, what Nari Yoon saw looking back at her wasn't pain. Wasn't fear. Wasn't shame or humiliation. It was peace. Complete, total, unshakable peace. Are you finished? Zora asked. Her voice was quiet. Steady. Like nothing even happened. Over in the corner booth, surrounded by his men in expensive black suits, sat a man they called the Ghost. Kang Do-hyun hadn't shown real emotion in 8 years. Not once. His face was always the same, cold, blank, unreadable. But right now? Right now he set down his glass of soju. First time anybody could remember him doing that. He leaned forward in his seat. And the look in those steel gray eyes? His own people had never seen anything like it. Now look, I'm about to take you deep into this story. We're talking betrayal, conspiracy, a woman who refused to break, and a mafia boss who just realized everything he thought he knew was wrong. But real quick, if you're new here and you've been watching these stories without subscribing, I see you. And honestly, I'm not even mad. But if this story hits different, if you feel something in the next few minutes, do me a favor. Just one. Smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Alright. Let me show you how we got here. Hamel wasn't just a restaurant. It was a whole other world. The place sat on the top floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, and from the outside, you'd never even know it was there. No big signs. No flashy lights. Just a plain black door with a small gold symbol that most people walked right past without noticing. But behind that door? Pure luxury. We're talking hand-carved wooden panels imported from Korea. Silk screens that cost more than some apartments. Crystal chandeliers that threw soft golden light across everything. The tables were spaced far apart so conversations stayed private. The chairs were so comfortable you could sit for hours without realizing it. And the food? Don't even get me started. Korean barbecue that melted on your tongue. Fusion dishes that mixed old traditions with new flavors. A wine list thicker than a dictionary. But Hamel wasn't famous for its food. Not really. It was famous for what happened between bites. This was the place where billion-dollar deals got made over bowls of bulgogi. Where politicians shook hands with businessmen under the soft glow of candlelight. Where secrets got traded like currency and promises got sealed with expensive champagne. Everybody who mattered in New York knew about Hamel. And everybody knew the unwritten rule: whatever happens at Hamel, stays at Hamel. At least, that's how it worked until tonight. Zora Pemberton had been working at Hamel for 2 years. 26 years old. Raised in Brooklyn. The kind of woman who didn't complain, didn't make excuses, just put her head down and worked. She had to. There was no other choice. Her parents died when she was 19. Car accident. A truck ran a red light on a rainy Tuesday, and just like that, Zora's whole world fell apart. 1 minute she was a college freshman with dreams of becoming a teacher. The next minute she was standing in a funeral home trying to figure out how to pay for 2 caskets. Her grandmother stepped in. Took Zora and her little brother Kendrick under her wing. Raised them in a small apartment in Brooklyn with love and discipline and Sunday dinners that made everything feel okay, even when it wasn't. But 6 months ago, Grandma got sick. Cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't care about your plans. She died holding Zora's hand, that silver cross pressed between their palms. And she left behind $87,000 in medical debt. $87,000. The number haunted Zora every single night. She'd lay in bed doing the math over and over, trying to figure out how to make it work. Because it wasn't just the debt. There was Kendrick too. Her little brother was 14 now. Born deaf. Smart as a whip, funny as anybody you'd ever meet, but he needed special education. A school that could teach him properly. A school that cost $4,200 every single month. So Zora worked. Double shifts at Hamel. Sometimes 16 hours straight. She'd come home with her feet aching and her back screaming, grab 4 hours of sleep if she was lucky, then get up and do it all over again. She hadn't bought herself new shoes in 3 years. Every dollar went to Kendrick's school or Grandma's debt or the rent on their tiny apartment. But she never complained. Not once. Because that's not who she was. Tonight though, tonight was rough. The restaurant was short-staffed. 2 servers called in sick, which meant Zora was covering extra tables. She was exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep and 3 cups of coffee. Her feet hurt. Her head hurt. Everything hurt. But she kept moving. Kept smiling. Kept doing her job. Then she got assigned to table 7. Nari Yoon was the kind of woman who walked into a room and expected everyone to notice. Tall. Beautiful in that sharp, expensive way. Designer clothes, designer bag, diamonds dripping from her ears and fingers and wrists. She moved like she owned every space she entered. And for a while, she kind of did. See, Nari used to date Kang Do-hyun. 2 years they were together. She was basically Korean royalty in certain circles, the girlfriend of the most powerful man on the East Coast. Doors opened for her. People bowed. Nobody dared say no to anything she wanted. But then Do-hyun ended it. 6 months ago, out of nowhere, he just ended it. No real explanation. No second chances. Just done. Nari had been trying to claw her way back ever since. Showing up at his restaurants. His events. Anywhere he might be, hoping he'd change his mind. Hoping to remind him what he was missing. Tonight she was at Hamel with 3 of her socialite friends, drinking too much wine and getting louder with every glass. She kept glancing toward the VIP booth in the corner where Do-hyun sat with his men. Kept waiting for him to look her way. He didn't. And that made her angrier with every passing minute. By the time Zora approached to refill their wine glasses, Nari was already on edge. Already looking for somebody to take it out on. Zora didn't know any of this. She was just doing her job. She reached across the table with the bottle of Chateau Margaux. At the exact same moment, another server passed behind her, bumping her elbow slightly. 3 drops of red wine splashed out. landed right on Nari's white blouse. Everything went crazy after that. Nari jumped up from her chair like she'd been burned. Her face twisted with rage. She started screaming, actually screaming, in the middle of this quiet, elegant restaurant. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? Zora's heart dropped. She immediately grabbed a napkin. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me help you clean. Don't touch me. Nari yanked away. Do you have any idea how much this blouse costs? Do you? It's Valentino. $8,000. And your clumsy, worthless self just ruined it. Everyone was staring now. The whole restaurant. Conversation stopped. Forks frozen in midair. Ma'am, I'm truly sorry. It was an accident. Please, let me. And that's when Nari's hand came up. Fast. Hard. The slap echoed through the entire room. Zora's head snapped to the side. Her cheek exploded with pain. She could taste a tiny bit of blood where she'd bit the inside of her lip. The room went dead silent. The head chef stood frozen behind the kitchen window, soup ladle dripping onto the floor without him even noticing. The sommelier held a $3,000 bottle of wine suspended in midair, not moving. At table 12, a group of businessmen paused their multi-million-dollar negotiation, expensive pens hovering over unsigned documents. Franklin Gaines, the 58-year-old restaurant manager with silver hair and tired eyes, gripped the host's stand so hard his knuckles turned white. In 22 years at Hamel, he'd never seen anything like this. And in the VIP booth in the corner, Kang Do-hyun sat perfectly still. His men around him held their breath, waiting to see what he'd do. But Zora didn't look at any of them. She just stood there for a moment. Her cheek burning. Her heart pounding. Every eye in the room locked on her. Waiting for her to cry. Waiting for her to run. Waiting for her to crumble. Instead, her hand went up to that silver cross. She closed her eyes. Said a silent prayer. 1 second. 2. 3. Then she opened her eyes, looked right at Nari, and spoke in a voice as calm as still water. Are you finished? Nari's mouth fell open. And across the room, Kang Do-hyun, the man they called the ghost, the man who never reacted to anything, set down his glass of soju and leaned forward with an expression nobody had ever seen on his face before. And in that moment, as the most dangerous man in the room set down his glass and leaned forward, Zora Pemberton had no idea that those 3 seconds of prayer had just changed the whole direction of her life. Nari Yoon stood there with her hands still up in the air. Frozen. Confused. Her brain trying to catch up with what just happened. See, she'd done this before. Not the slapping part exactly, but the intimidation thing. The putting people in their place thing. She knew how it was supposed to go. She'd seen it 100 times. First comes the hit. Then comes the tears. Then comes the begging, the apologizing, the desperate pleading for forgiveness. That's how it always worked. That's how the world worked when you had money and power and connections. But this waitress, this nobody in a cheap uniform with tired eyes, hadn't followed the script. She'd touched her necklace. She'd closed her eyes. She'd prayed, for God's sake. And then she'd looked right at Nari and asked, calm as anything, are you finished? Like Nari was a child throwing a tantrum. Like that slap meant nothing. Something twisted in Nari's chest. Embarrassment. Confusion. And underneath it all, a rage so hot it made her vision blur. Her hand came up again, ready to swing. That's when she heard the footsteps. Kang Do-hyun moved like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. Slow. Deliberate. Each step hitting the marble floor like a drumbeat. Like a warning. The whole restaurant tracked him with their eyes, even though everybody pretended they weren't looking. The businessmen at table 12 suddenly found their plates real interesting. A woman near the window studied her wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. The servers along the wall pressed themselves back, trying to disappear. From the shadows near the entrance, a man emerged. Taemin. Do-hyen's bodyguard. Tall, built like a fighter, with eyes that missed nothing. He moved when Do-hyen moved, staying a few steps behind, ready for whatever came next. Nari watched Do-hyen approach, and for just a second, her heart jumped. Maybe he was coming to defend her. Maybe he still cared after all. Maybe this was her moment. She dropped her hand. Fixed her face into something softer. Let her eyes go wide and wounded. But Do-hyen walked right past her. He stopped between her and Zora, his back to the waitress, his eyes locked on Nari. And what Nari saw in those steel-gray eyes made her blood run cold. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No warmth, no affection, no memory of what they used to be. Just ice. Do-hyen, Nari started, reaching for his arm. Baby, I don't. One word. Quiet. But it cut through the air like a blade. Nari's hand stopped mid-reach. You struck a woman, Do-hyen said. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried through the whole room. In my restaurant. In front of my guests. Over wine. She ruined my blouse. Nari's voice came out higher than she meant it to. Desperate. This is Valentino, Do-hyen. $8,000. And this clumsy little. I don't care about your blouse. Nari blinked. What? I don't care if she spilled an entire bottle on you. I don't care if she set your clothes on fire. Do-hyen's eyes never left hers. Never blinked. You lost control. In public. In my establishment. You made a scene that every person in this room will remember. I was defending our reputation. Our reputation? Something flickered in Do-hyen's expression. Something almost like disgust. There is no our anymore. There hasn't been for 6 months. And even when there was, you had no reputation worth defending. Nari felt the words hit her chest like bullets. You lost whatever reputation you had, Do-hyen continued, the moment you lost control over 3 drops of wine. The moment you raised your hand to someone who couldn't fight back. The moment you showed everyone in this room exactly who you really are. Tears started forming in Nari's eyes. Real ones this time, not the fake kind she usually used to get her way. Do-hyen, please. I made a mistake. I was upset. He raised his hand slightly. Just a small gesture. But it was enough. Taemin stepped forward. Take Miss Yoon home, Do-hyen said, his voice flat and final. She's had too much to drink. She won't be returning tonight. Do-hyen, you can't be serious. She won't be returning at all. The whole restaurant heard it. Everybody pretending not to listen heard every single word. Nari Yoon, the woman who used to walk into Hamel like she owned the place, was being kicked out. Banned. In front of everyone who mattered. The humiliation hit her all at once. She could feel the stares. The whispers that would start the second she left. By tomorrow, everyone in their circle would know. By next week, it would be all anyone talked about. Taemin's hand closed around her elbow. Firm but not rough. Professional. Like he was handling a package that needed to be delivered somewhere else. Nari yanked her arm away, but she knew it was over. There was no winning this. As Taemin guided her toward the door, Nari turned back. Not to look at Do-hyen. To look at Zora. The waitress was still standing there. Still calm. Still holding that stupid silver cross like it was some kind of shield. Nari's eyes narrowed. Her lips barely moved as she spoke, but Zora heard every word. This isn't over. Then she was gone, disappearing through the restaurant door with Taemin right behind her. The room let out a breath it didn't know it was holding. Slowly, conversation started back up. Forks started moving again. The restaurant tried to pretend everything was normal, even though nothing would ever be normal again. But Zora didn't move. Because Kang Do-hyun had finally turned around. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Took in the bruise already blooming purple on her cheek. The slight swelling near her eye. Her hand, still resting on that silver cross. And her face, completely dry. Not a single tear. Most people couldn't hold Do-hyun's gaze for more than a few seconds. Something about those eyes made you want to look away. Made you feel like he could see straight through you. But Zora didn't look away. She just waited. You didn't cry, Do-hyun said finally. Not a question. An observation. No, sir. Why not? Zora's answer came without hesitation. Like she'd known this question was coming her whole life. Because tears don't pay my bills. And they don't keep my brother in school. Something shifted in Do-hyun's expression. Just for a second. So fast you'd miss it if you blinked. He nodded toward her necklace. The cross. Tell me about it. Zora's fingers tightened around the small silver pendant. It belonged to my great-great-grandmother. She bought it after Reconstruction, with the first money she ever earned as a free woman. It's been passed down through 4 generations. My grandmother gave it to me 6 months ago. Right before she died. And you used something that precious to pray for the woman who just struck you? No, sir. Zora shook her head slowly. I wasn't praying for her. I was praying for myself. For yourself? For the strength not to become what she wanted me to be. Silence. Do-hyun stared at her for a long moment. The restaurant buzzed around them, but it felt like they were the only 2 people in the room. Then he turned to Franklin Gaines, who had been standing frozen at the host's stand this entire time, looking like he might pass out. Franklin. The older man jumped. Why yes, Mr. Kang. Bring Miss Pemberton to my private office in 1 hour. Franklin's face went pale. Sir. 1 hour. Don't be late. And with that, Kang Do-hyun walked back to his VIP booth like nothing had happened. His men parted for him. He sat down. He picked up his glass of soju again. But he didn't drink it. He just held it, eyes distant, thinking about something nobody else could see. Franklin rushed over to Zora the second Do-hyun was back in his seat. Child, what did you do? His voice was shaking. His eyes were wide. In 22 years I've worked here, I have never seen that man speak that many words to anyone. Not his business partners. Not his family. Nobody. Zora didn't have an answer. She was still trying to process everything herself. Just finish your shift, Franklin said, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. Clear your tables. Stay out of trouble. And pray, child. Pray hard. Zora almost laughed at that last part. Praying was what got her into this situation. But she didn't laugh. She just nodded. Yes, Mr. Gaines. The rest of the night felt like walking through a dream. Zora went back to work. Cleared dishes. Refilled water glasses. Smiled at customers who looked at her like she was some kind of zoo exhibit. But everything had changed, and everybody knew it. The other servers kept their distance. Some of them looked at her with fear, like she'd caught some kind of disease they didn't want to catch. Others looked at her with something else. Something like hope. Like maybe if this waitress could stand up to people like Nari Yoon and survive, maybe there was hope for all of them. Zora ignored the looks. She focused on her work. 1 table at a time. 1 dish at a time. But her hands had started trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. And the bruise on her cheek throbbed with every heartbeat. When she got to table 7, the table where everything had happened, she paused. Nari's wine glass was still there. Still had a little bit of red wine at the bottom. 3 napkins lay crumpled on the white tablecloth. Zora picked them up. stacked the plates, did her job, and tried not to think about what was waiting for her in that private office. Across town, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, Nari Yoon was already making phone calls. Her mascara was ruined. Her hands were shaking. But her voice was steady. "I need to meet with you," she said into the phone. "Tonight. It's about Do-hyun. And I have a way to bring him down." The voice on the other end laughed softly. "I'm listening." And as Zora cleared the last of the dishes from table 7, her hands finally starting to tremble now that the adrenaline was fading, she had no idea that the woman she'd just watched leave was already planning her destruction. The kitchen had never been this quiet. Zora walked through the swinging doors, following Franklin down the long corridor toward the back of the restaurant. Around her, the kitchen staff froze. Cook stopped mid-chop. The dishwasher turned off the water. Even the guy working the grill stepped back from the flames. Everybody watched her pass. Some of them looked at her like she was walking to her own funeral. Others looked at her like she'd grown a second head. A few of them, the ones who'd been at Hamel long enough to know things, they just looked scared. Franklin led the way, his footsteps echoing in the silence. His hands were shaking. Zora could see them trembling at his sides, and that made her more nervous than anything else. Franklin Gaines had worked at Hamel for 22 years. He'd seen things. Handled things. He was the kind of man who stayed calm when everybody else panicked. But right now? Right now he looked like a man walking through a graveyard at midnight. They passed the staff lockers. Past the break room. Past a door marked storage that Zora had never seen anyone actually open. Finally, they stopped in front of a plain black door at the very end of the hallway. No sign on it. No window. Just black wood and a brass handle. Franklin turned to her. His face was pale, his forehead damp with sweat. "Whatever you do," he said quietly, "be respectful. Answer his questions. Don't lie to him, he'll know if you're lying. And don't." He paused, like he was trying to find the right words. "Don't make any sudden moves." Before Zora could ask what that meant, Franklin knocked twice on the door, waited for a muffled response, and pushed it open. "Miss Pemberton, sir," he announced. Then he stepped aside and practically pushed Zora through the doorway. The door closed behind her with a soft click. She was alone. The room was darker than she expected. One small lamp sat on a desk in the corner, throwing golden shadows across the walls. The curtains were drawn. No windows visible. The only other light came from a fireplace on the far wall, where flames crackled softly, casting dancing patterns across everything. Zora took it all in with quick glances. Brooklyn habit. When you walk into a new space, you learn it fast. Where's the exit? Who's in the room? What can be used as a weapon if things go sideways? She clocked the Korean calligraphy on the walls, beautiful brushstrokes she couldn't read. A small Buddhist shrine in the corner with incense burning low. Bookshelves lined with old texts. A desk that looked expensive but barely used. And there, in a leather armchair by the fireplace, sat Kang Do-hyun. He wasn't behind the desk like a boss doing an interview. He was relaxed, or as relaxed as a man like him probably got. Legs crossed. One hand resting on the armchair. The firelight playing across his face, making his features look sharper. More dangerous. A second chair sat across from him. Empty. Waiting. "Sit," he said. Not a request. Not an invitation. Just a word. Zora walked toward the chair, but she didn't rush. She moved slowly, still taking in the room, still reading the space. The way the shadows fell. The distance to the door. The fact that there was no one else here, no bodyguard, no assistant, no witness. She sat down. Do-hyun studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You're observant," he said finally. "Most people rush in. They're so nervous they don't see anything." But you were reading the room. I grew up in Brooklyn, sir. Zora kept her voice steady. You learn to read a room quick, or you don't grow up at all. Something flickered in Do-hyun's eyes. Interest, maybe. Or respect. Hard to tell with a face that gave away nothing. Tell me about your family, he said. Zora hesitated. What do you want to know? Everything. So she told him. She told him about Kendrick. 14 years old. Deaf since birth. Smartest kid she knew, funny as anything, with a smile that could light up a whole room. He went to a special school that actually knew how to teach him, sign language, regular subjects, everything. Cost $4,200 every single month. She told him about her parents. The accident. How one rainy Tuesday had ripped her whole world apart. How she'd been 19 years old, standing in a funeral home, trying to figure out how to bury two people when she could barely afford to feed herself. She told him about her grandmother. How she'd stepped in without question, taken both kids under her wing, raised them with love and discipline and faith. Sunday dinners. Bible verses. That silver cross, pressed into Zora's palm as the monitors beeped slower and slower. She died 6 months ago, Zora said quietly. Left behind $87,000 in medical debt. Hospital bills. Treatments that didn't work. I'm still paying it off. Do-hyun's expression didn't change, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. 2 jobs, Zora continued. Sometimes 3. Hamel pays the best, so I take every shift I can get. 16-hour days. 4 hours of sleep if I'm lucky. Everything I make goes to Kendrick's school or my grandmother's debt or the rent. How long have you been living like this? Since I was 19. So, 7 years. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the restaurant, a door opened and closed. Faint sounds of the kitchen starting to clean up for the night. Do-hyun nodded slowly. Then his eyes dropped to her necklace. The cross. May I see it? Zora's hand went to her throat automatically. Protective. That cross hadn't left her neck since the day her grandmother died. I don't take it off, she said carefully. Do-hyun didn't push. Just waited. After a moment, Zora lifted the cross up, holding it out toward the firelight so he could see it without her removing it. The small silver pendant caught the flames, glowing warm. Do-hyun leaned forward slightly, studying the worn metal. The tiny words engraved on the back, so faded you could barely read them anymore. By grace through faith, he read quietly. Your great-great-grandmother's? Yes. She bought it with the first money she ever earned as a free woman. It's been passed down ever since. Silence. The fire popped. A log shifted. The shadows danced. When Do-hyun spoke again, his voice was softer than before. Still controlled, still distant, but different somehow. My grandmother had something similar, he said. A jade pendant. Green, like the mountains where she grew up in Korea. She said it contained our family's honor. She wore it every day until she died. Zora didn't know what to say to that. So she said nothing. For a long moment, they just sat there. 2 people from completely different worlds, connected by grandmothers and heirlooms and grief. Then Do-hyun straightened up, and his voice returned to business. Your salary triples starting tonight. Zora blinked. I'm sorry. You heard me. Triple. Whatever you're making now, multiply it by 3. That's your new wage. Sir, I don't. I'm not finished. Do-hyun held up a hand. From now on, no one in this restaurant touches you. No one speaks to you disrespectfully. No one makes your job harder than it needs to be. If anyone gives you trouble, staff, customers, anyone, you report it to Franklin. And Franklin reports to me. Zora's mind was spinning. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. Plain. Direct. Most people didn't ask Kang Do-hyun questions like that. Most people just said thank you and bowed and got the hell out. But Zora wasn't most people. Do-hyun studied her for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he answered. Because I'm curious, he said simply. About someone who can take a blow like that and not break. About someone who prays for herself instead of crying. About someone who can look at me right now, knowing exactly who I am and what I'm capable of, and still ask me why. He gestured toward the door. Go back to work. Finish your shift. Your new salary starts immediately. Zora stood slowly. Her legs felt unsteady, like she'd just stepped off a boat. But she made her way toward the door, trying to process everything that had just happened. Her hand was on the doorknob when Do-hyun spoke again. Miss Pemberton. She turned back. He was still sitting in that armchair, firelight dancing across his face, eyes reflecting the flames. The woman who hit you tonight, she wasn't always like that. She was different once. Kinder. But power changed her. Money changed her. He paused. Don't let it change you. Zora stood there, hand on the door, looking at the most dangerous man she'd ever met. A man who'd just tripled her salary for reasons she couldn't understand. A man who defended her against his own ex-girlfriend. A man who had a Buddhist shrine in his office and memories of his grandmother's jade pendant. With all respect, sir, she said quietly, I've never had power or money. So I guess we'll never find out. She opened the door and stepped through. Behind her, she could have sworn she heard something. A small sound. Quick and soft. Almost like a laugh. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Zora finished her shift on autopilot. Cleared tables. Took payments. Said goodnight to coworkers who looked at her like she'd just returned from the moon. Franklin found her as she was clocking out. Well? He asked, voice tight with anxiety. What happened? What did he say? He tripled my salary, Zora said, still not quite believing the words coming out of her own mouth. And told me nobody's allowed to bother me anymore. Franklin's jaw dropped. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, just staring. In 22 years. He muttered, shaking his head. 22 years. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. At 2 a.m., Zora descended into the subway. The platform was mostly empty. Just a few late-night travelers and a homeless man sleeping on a bench. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that harsh white glow that made everyone look tired. Zora leaned against a pillar, waiting for her train. Triple salary. Protection. Why? She replayed the conversation in her head. Tried to find the catch. The trick. The angle. Because there was always an angle. Nobody gave you something for nothing. That was the first rule of surviving Brooklyn, of surviving poverty, of surviving life. But she couldn't find it. Couldn't figure out what Do-hyun wanted from her. What he expected. What she was supposed to give in return. The train came. She got on. Found a seat in the corner where she could watch the whole car. Brooklyn habit. As the subway rattled through the dark tunnels beneath Manhattan, Zora touched the silver cross at her throat. What did I get myself into, Grandma? She whispered. No answer. Just the rumble of the train and the flickering lights and the long ride home. But as she descended into the subway at 2 a.m., Zora couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just signed some kind of invisible contract. And she had no idea what the terms really were. Nari Yoon slammed the door of her penthouse so hard the fancy vase in the entryway wobbled. Get out, she screamed at her driver, who had followed her upstairs to make sure she was okay. All of you, out. The man backed away quickly, hands raised. He'd worked for Nari long enough to know when to disappear. The elevator doors closed on his worried face, and then Nari was finally alone. The Upper East Side penthouse, all white marble and glass walls and views of Central Park, felt too big and too small at the same time. She paced across the living room, heels clicking against the floor like angry little hammers. Her whole body was shaking. Not from fear. From rage. The humiliation kept replaying in her mind like a video she couldn't turn off. Being escorted out of Hamel. In front of everyone. All those eyes watching. All those whispers that would start the second she left. Kicked out like some misbehaving child who'd had too much to drink. And all because of what? A waitress? A nobody in a cheap uniform who didn't know her place? Aya. Nari grabbed the crystal decanter from her bar cart and hurled it across the room. It exploded against the wall in a shower of glass and expensive bourbon. It wasn't enough. She picked up a vase next, a wedding gift from some distant relative, and smashed that too. Better. But still not enough to kill the hot, sick feeling in her chest. 2 years. Nari and Do-hyun had been together for 2 years. She had been the perfect girlfriend. Beautiful. Cultured. Connected to all the right families. She knew how to dress, how to entertain, how to make his business partners feel comfortable. She knew when to speak and when to stay silent. She'd been raised for exactly this role, to be the elegant, sophisticated partner to a powerful man. And she'd really thought it was leading somewhere. She was supposed to be his wife. His queen. The woman who stood beside him as he built his empire bigger and bigger. But then, 6 months ago, he'd ended it. Just like that. No warning. No real explanation. Just a conversation in this very apartment, his voice calm and distant. This isn't working anymore. I think we should end things. When she'd asked why, begged why, he'd simply said, we want different things, Nari. And I don't think that's going to change. He'd walked out. And that was it. Nari had called. Texted. Shown up at his office. Nothing worked. It was like hitting a wall of ice. So she'd changed tactics. Started showing up at places she knew he'd be. His restaurants. His clubs. His events. Always looking perfect. Always surrounded by the right people. Always making sure he saw her. Tonight was supposed to be her big moment. A chance to remind him what he was missing. She'd worn his favorite dress. Planned exactly what she'd say if he approached her. Instead, she'd gotten slapped down like she was nothing. Less than nothing. And all because of that waitress with her stupid necklace and her calm eyes and her, "Are you finished?" Nari grabbed another vase. Threw it harder this time. After the third vase, she finally stopped. Stood in the middle of her wrecked living room, breathing hard, hands still trembling. This wasn't helping. Breaking things wouldn't fix anything. And it definitely wouldn't make Do-hyun pay. She needed something else. Someone else. Nari walked to her bedroom, brushing glass shards off her clothes as she went. In her nightstand, behind a stack of fashion magazines, was a phone. Not her regular phone, the one everyone knew about, but a second one. A burner. She only used it for one person. Her fingers hovered over the screen for just a second before she made the call. 3 rings. Then a voice. Smooth. Amused. Like the person on the other end had been expecting this all night. "Let me guess," Kang Junwoo said. "He embarrassed you again." Junwoo wasn't supposed to be at the nightclub. He had meetings in the morning, important ones with people who didn't like to be kept waiting. But when Nari Yoon called at midnight, sounding like she was one breath away from a complete breakdown, he changed his plans. Because Nari had information. And information was power. He sat across from her in the private VIP room, watching her down her third vodka martini. Her hands had mostly stopped shaking. Her eyes were dry now, burning with something much more useful than tears. Hatred. "So let me get this straight," Junwoo said, leaning back in the leather booth. "You slapped a waitress over some spilled wine." Do-hyun stepped in. Kicked you out. And you think this is useful to me because he looked at her, Nari snapped. You don't understand. He looked at her, Junwoo. Like she was something special. Like she mattered. He looked at a waitress. So what? No, you don't get it. In 2 years together, he never once looked at me the way he looked at her tonight. Like he was actually seeing her. And he spoke to her. In front of everyone. That made Junwoo pause. Because she was right, that was unusual. Do-hyun rarely spoke to anyone in public unless absolutely necessary. He definitely didn't waste words on service staff. Tell me about this waitress, he said, signaling for another round of drinks. Everything you remember. Kang Junwoo had been waiting for his moment for 3 years. He was the one who should have inherited the family business. The legitimate side, anyway, the art import-export company, the real estate holdings, the respectable investments. That had always been the plan. Junwoo would run the clean side, Do-hyun would handle the shadows. Until their grandmother changed everything. 3 years ago, the old woman had summoned them both to her home in Korea. Junwoo had flown in from New York expecting to finally receive his birthright. Instead, she'd announced that Do-hyun would take control of everything, both the legal businesses and the underworld connections. Her explanation was simple: he has steel in his soul. You do not. 3 generations of family business, gone in one sentence. Handed to his cousin, a man who barely spoke, who lived in the shadows, who didn't even want the respectable side of things. Junwoo had smiled. Bowed. Wished his cousin well. And then he'd started planning. For 3 years, he'd been building his own connections. Finding allies who felt overlooked by Do-hyun. Collecting information. Waiting for the perfect opportunity to prove his grandmother wrong. And now, finally, that opportunity was walking through the door. This waitress could be useful, Junwoo said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. A distraction at the very least. Maybe something more. Nari leaned forward eagerly. I want her gone. Fired. Ruined. No. Junwoo shook his head. That's thinking too small. If Do-hyun's interested in her for whatever reason, we can use that. How? I've been setting something up for months now. An art smuggling operation. Very sophisticated. The kind of thing that attracts serious attention from serious people. Smuggling? I don't understand. What does that have to do with? When it gets exposed, and it will, at exactly the right moment, all the evidence will point to Do-hyun. Every document. Every contact. Every shipment. Junwoo's eyes gleamed. Interpol will get an anonymous tip. They'll raid his office. His home. His businesses. And they'll find everything they need to put him away for a very, very long time. Nari's eyes widened. But what about his connections? His protection? Even Do-hyun can't fight Interpol. This isn't some local cop he can bribe or threaten. This is international law enforcement. And I've made sure the evidence is airtight. And the waitress? She's inside his world now. If he's showing interest in her, he might let her see things. Tell her things. She might become a weakness we can exploit. Junwoo leaned back, his mind already working through the possibilities. And when Do-hyun falls, guess who'll be right there to pick up the pieces? To comfort his poor grandmother? To suggest that perhaps I should take over the family business in this difficult time? A slow smile spread across Nari's face. And what about me? What do I get? Junwoo reached across the table, took her hand. Anything you want, dear Nari. Position. Power. Revenge. And a front row seat to watch Do-hyun lose everything, just like he took everything from us. The plan was coming together. But they needed one more piece. What about the restaurant manager? Nari said, the vodka making her thoughts sharper, darker. Franklin Gaines. He's been there forever. Knows all of Do-hyun's routines, his meetings, his contacts. Would he help us? Not willingly. He's loyal to a fault. Been with Do-hyun's family for decades. Then we need to find his weakness. Junwoo pulled out his phone. Everyone has one. Everyone. He made a quick call, spoke in rapid-fire Korean, then hung up with a satisfied smile. My people will look into Mr. Gaines. If there's anything to find, they'll find it. Across town, in a small apartment in Queens, Franklin Gaines sat at his kitchen table. His wife of 32 years was asleep in the bedroom, peaceful and unaware. In front of Franklin was a stack of papers. Casino bills. Loan notices. Final warnings from debt collectors. And a letter from the retirement account company showing a balance of 0. All their savings. Gone. Franklin put his head in his hands and wept silently. He'd started gambling 2 years ago. Just small bets at first, horses, sports games. Nothing serious. Then he'd found the underground poker games. The private casinos. The loan sharks who were so friendly when you were borrowing and so terrifying when you couldn't pay. He owed $157,000 now. Money he didn't have. Would never have. They'd given him 3 days to come up with the first payment. After that, they'd start taking things. His house. His car. His wife. What am I going to do? He whispered to the empty kitchen. Dear God, what am I going to do? His phone rang, making him jump. Unknown number. His hands shook as he answered. Hello? Mr. Gaines, said a voice he didn't recognize. I think we can help each other. Across the city, in a tiny Brooklyn apartment, Zora Pemberton slept better than she had in months. For the first time since her grandmother died, she didn't wake up in the middle of the night calculating bills. Didn't stare at the ceiling doing desperate math in her head. Triple salary. It would pay off her grandmother's debt in a year instead of 5. It would cover Kendrick's school with money left over. It would mean 1 job instead of 3. It would mean sleep. Real sleep. Her hand rested on the silver cross at her throat, and she dreamed of her grandmother's smile. And while Zora Pemberton slept peacefully for the first time in months, her brother's tuition paid, her grandmother's debt reduced, the woman who had slapped her was sharpening knives in the dark. The war had begun. Zora just didn't know she was a soldier yet. 2 weeks can change a lot. 2 weeks ago, Zora Pemberton was drowning in debt, working herself to exhaustion, and barely staying afloat. Now she had breathing room. Her grandmother's medical bills weren't gone, but they were manageable. Kendrick's school was paid through the end of the year. She'd even bought herself a new pair of shoes, nothing fancy, just comfortable ones that didn't hurt her feet after a 12-hour shift. She still worked hard. That hadn't changed. But the desperate edge was gone. The constant knot of panic in her stomach had loosened. For the first time in years, she wasn't one emergency away from total collapse. But something felt off. Zora couldn't put her finger on it at first. Just a feeling. A sense that things at Hamel weren't quite right. Whispered conversations that stopped the second she walked into the break room. Servers who used to be friendly now avoiding her eyes. And Franklin. Franklin was the strangest of all. He'd practically disappeared. When she did see him, he'd rush through their conversations, looking everywhere but at her face. His hands trembled more than usual. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, like he wasn't sleeping. Twice now, she'd caught him in the back alley on his phone, talking in a low, urgent voice. Both times, he'd hung up the second he saw her. Something was definitely wrong. Okay, this is where things start getting twisted. And I know some of you are already hooked, I can tell by the watch time. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. This story is about to go places you're not expecting. Smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Alright, let's keep moving. Franklin, can I talk to you for a minute? Zora had finally cornered him in the wine cellar on a Tuesday night. The restaurant was slow, just a few tables, and he couldn't claim to be too busy. Franklin nearly dropped the bottle he was holding. Zora. I didn't hear you come in. That's because you've been avoiding me for 2 weeks. She crossed her arms. What's going on? Nothing's going on. I'm just busy. End of the quarter, you know how it gets. His eyes were everywhere but on her face. Left, right, up at the ceiling, down at the floor. Classic signs of lying. Franklin, come on. It's me. You've known me for 2 years. You were the one who hired me, remember? You were the one who gave me extra shifts when Kendrick needed new hearing aids. She stepped closer, lowered her voice. You were the one who told me, you've got something special, child. Don't let this place take it from you. Remember that? First day I started? So what changed? Something flickered in Franklin's eyes. Pain, maybe. Or fear. Nothing's changed, he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. I've got a lot on my mind. Before Zora could press him further, another server poked his head in. Zora? There's a call for you at the front desk. Take a message. I'm busy. You don't understand. It's from Kong Tower. They said it's urgent. Zora and Franklin looked at each other. His face had gone pale. We'll finish this later, she said, but Franklin was already pushing past her, muttering something about inventory counts. The call was short. Just a woman's voice, crisp and professional. Miss Pemberton, your presence is requested at Kong Tower tomorrow at 11 a.m. A car will pick you up at your apartment. Mr. Kong doesn't like to be kept waiting. That was it. No explanation. No room for questions. Zora hung up the phone, feeling like she'd just been summoned by royalty. In a way, she had. Kong Tower stood in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, a gleaming spire of glass and steel that rose 68 stories above the city. Unlike Hamel, hidden behind an unmarked door, Kong Tower announced itself boldly. The company name was displayed in elegant silver letters across the lobby entrance, Kong Industries. The legitimate side of Do Hyun's empire. Art imports and exports. Real estate. Investments. All perfectly legal, at least on paper. The car dropped Zora at the private entrance, where a security guard was waiting for her. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. Just escorted her to an elevator that required a keycard to operate. Top floor, he said, swiping the card. He's expecting you. The elevator shot upward so fast her ears popped. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world completely different from the dark, intimate space of Hamel. Do Hyun's corporate office was all light and air. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. Modern art hung on walls painted pristine white. Everything was sleek, minimalist, expensive in the most understated way possible. A woman at a glass desk looked up as Zora approached. Miss Pemberton. Mr. Kong is ready for you. Zora followed her down a hallway, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and worn bag. She hadn't known what to wear to meet a billionaire at his office, so she'd chosen her best dress, navy blue, modest, the one she saved for special occasions. But surrounded by all this glass and steel and perfection, she felt painfully out of place. The woman opened a door at the end of the hall and gestured for Zora to enter. Do Hyun was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the city like a king surveying his kingdom. He didn't turn when she entered. Miss Pemberton, he said. Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? The words came out before she could stop them. Now he did turn, and for a split second, Zora could have sworn she saw amusement flicker across his face. But it was gone so fast she might have imagined it. Please, sit. He gestured to a chair in front of his desk. This office was different from the private room at Hamel. Brighter. More open. But Do-hyun himself was unchanged, still controlled, still watchful, still giving away nothing in his expression. He sat across from her, hands folded on the polished surface of his desk. "You've been at Hamel for 3 weeks since our last conversation," he said. "You're observant. Tell me what you've seen." Zora hesitated. Was this a test? It felt like a test. "Everything, sir." "Or something specific?" "Everything." She took a deep breath and decided to be honest. Brooklyn had taught her that when you're in deep water, the truth is usually the only thing that keeps you afloat. "Something's wrong with Franklin," she said. "He's scared of something. Or someone. He makes phone calls in the back alley when he thinks nobody's watching. His hands shake all the time now. He can't look me in the eye." Do-hyun's expression didn't change, but he leaned forward slightly. "What else?" "The staff is different around me. Some treat me better now, I guess they heard about my raise. Others avoid me completely. Like I've got some kind of disease they don't want to catch." "And the guests?" "Most are the same. They don't really see servers, we're just hands that bring food, faces they forget as soon as they leave. But..." She paused, thinking about how to phrase this next part. "But?" Do-hyun prompted. "There are a few who look at me too long. Like they're trying to memorize my face. 3 men in particular. They've come in twice now, always sitting at table 15, always when my shift is ending." Something flickered in Do-hyun's eyes. Interest, maybe. Or concern. "Would you recognize these men if you saw them again?" "Yes. Definitely." Do-hyun nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. "You notice things, Miss Pemberton. Most people don't. They move through life with their eyes half closed, seeing only what they expect to see." He stood, walked to a cabinet on the far wall, and returned with a folder. "I have an offer for you." Zora stared at him. "An offer?" "I'm expanding the legitimate side of my business. The art world, specifically. It's a delicate space, full of wealthy clients, complex relationships, and valuable merchandise." He opened the folder, revealing photographs of art galleries, auction houses, and people in expensive clothes holding champagne glasses. "I need someone who can move between worlds. Someone educated enough for galleries, but street-smart enough to spot trouble before it happens. Someone who can attend events, meet clients, and report back what they observe." He paused. "A cultural liaison, if you will." Zora's mind was spinning. "Sir, I don't know anything about art." "You can learn. What matters is that you see people clearly. That you notice what others miss." "And my job at Hamel?" "You'll keep it for now. Cover will be useful. But your primary responsibilities would be here." Do-hyun closed the folder. "The salary is $200,000 per year. Plus full sponsorship of your brother's education, not just his current school, but college too, when the time comes." Zora felt like someone had just punched her in the chest. $200,000. A year. That was more money than she'd ever imagined earning. It would clear her grandmother's debt in months, not years. It would mean a better apartment. Better opportunities for Kendrick. It would change everything. But there had to be a catch. There was always a catch. "Why me?" she asked, voice steadier than she felt. "You have people who've been with you for years. People who are trained for this sort of thing." "Exactly." Do-hyun's eyes never left hers. "They've been with me for years. Everyone knows their faces. No one knows yours." He paused. "And more importantly, I watched you take a blow without breaking. That tells me more than any resume could." Zora sat with that for a moment, turning it over in her mind. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Do-hyun's eyebrows rose slightly. Clearly, that wasn't the response he was used to getting. "Most people don't ask for time," he said. "They just say yes." Most people haven't learned what I've learned, sir. Zora met his gaze steadily. Nothing free is ever really free. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the desk. Then Do-hyun nodded. You have until tomorrow, he said. The car will pick you up at 9 a.m. for your answer. On the subway home, Zora couldn't stop thinking about the offer. $200,000. Kendrick's education guaranteed. A whole new world opening up. It could change everything. But what would she be getting herself into? What would Do-hyun really expect from her? And why her? Why now? The question spun in her head as the train rumbled through dark tunnels. She touched the silver cross at her throat, closed her eyes, and whispered a prayer for guidance, just like her grandmother had taught her. When she opened her eyes, an older woman across the aisle was watching her with a gentle smile. That's a beautiful cross, the woman said. Thank you. It was my great-great-grandmother's. Must be special, to have lasted so long in the family. Zora nodded. She bought it with the first money she ever earned as a free woman. The woman's smile deepened. Then I'd say it knows something about making hard choices for the right reasons. The train stopped at Zora's station. As she stood to leave, the woman added. Trust your gut, honey. It knows the answer even when your head is still asking questions. Zora stepped off the train into the Brooklyn night, those words echoing in her mind. She touched the silver cross at her throat, whispered a prayer for guidance, and stepped off the train into the Brooklyn night. By the time she reached her building, she knew her answer. She just wasn't ready to admit why. The car arrived at exactly 9 a.m. Sleek black sedan. Tinted windows. Driver in a suit who didn't smile when he opened the door. Good morning, Miss Pemberton. Zora had been ready since 7. She'd barely slept, going over and over the decision in her mind. By sunrise, she'd made up her mind. Made sure Kendrick got off to school with a packed lunch and extra money for the field trip he'd been excited about for weeks. Now she slid into the back seat, smoothing down the nicest dress she owned, still not fancy enough for Kong Tower, but it was what she had. The ride to Midtown was quiet. She watched the streets change as they drove, from the familiar brick buildings of her Brooklyn neighborhood to the gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan. 2 different worlds. And somehow she was about to have a foot in both. When she walked into Do-hyun's office, he was already waiting. Standing at the window like before, hands behind his back, looking out at his city. Have you decided? He asked without turning. Yes. Zora set her bag down. But I have conditions. Now Do-hyun did turn. His eyebrow raised slightly, the most expression she'd ever seen on his face. People didn't give Kang Do-hyun conditions. They just took what he offered and said thank you. Go on. Kendrick's school is non-negotiable. If something happens to me, anything, he stays protected. His education is covered through college, no matter what. Do-hyun studied her face. Agreed. And I want to understand what I'm walking into. No lies. A strange look passed across Do-hyun's face, almost like amusement, but colder. I don't lie, Miss Pemberton. I simply don't always tell the whole truth. That's the same thing. No. It's not. You'll learn the difference. He extended his hand across the desk. Zora hesitated for just a second, then reached out and shook it. His grip was firm. His hand was warm. Just like that, her life changed again. Again. Taemin's voice was flat. Emotionless. He stood in the center of a training room in the basement of Kong Tower, arms crossed, watching Zora with eyes that missed nothing. I already did it twice, she said, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. Again, Taemin repeated. This time, tell me how many exits, how many potential weapons, and which person is carrying a gun. Zora sighed and turned to face the wall of photos. Restaurant interiors. Gallery openings. Hotel lobbies. Crowded events full of rich people in fancy clothes. First photo. The restaurant has 3 exits: front door, kitchen, and what looks like a service entrance in the back corner. Potential weapons include the steak knives on the tables, the heavy crystal candle holders, and the fire extinguisher by the bar. The man in the blue suit at table 12 is carrying a shoulder holster. You can see the slight bulge under his left arm. She moved to the next photo. Gallery opening. 2 visible exits, probably a third behind that curtain. Weapons limited to the champagne bottles, the metal sculpture stands, and the fire axe in the case on the far wall. The security guard by the door has a pistol, obviously. But so does the woman in the red dress, small caliber, ankle holster, right leg. Taemin's face didn't change, but he nodded slightly. You learn fast. Brooklyn taught me. Zora shrugged. You just gave me the vocabulary. 3 days of intensive training. Day 1, reading rooms, learning to scan any space the moment she entered. Counting exits. Spotting potential weapons. Identifying threats before they identified her. Day 2, reading people, body language, micro-expressions, the tiny tells that reveal when someone is lying or hiding something. Look at the eyes, Taemin said. Right and up means they're constructing a visual lie. Left and down means they're accessing a negative emotion they're trying to hide. Day 3, reading situations, recognizing traps before they closed. Understanding when a conversation wasn't just a conversation, when a business meeting had an ulterior motive, when a friendly smile hid dangerous intentions. By the end of the 3rd day, Taemin was showing her how to defend herself. Basic moves: how to break a hold, how to escape if someone grabbed her, how to use everyday objects as weapons if she had to. You won't need this, he said as he demonstrated how to use keys as a makeshift weapon. You'll have protection. But just in case. In case what? Taemin didn't answer. But his eyes said everything. The art world was like stepping onto another planet. Private galleries hidden in old warehouses. Auction houses with security tighter than most banks. Collectors who spoke about paintings like they were talking about old friends. Zora took it all in with wide eyes, trying to absorb everything at once. The names. The history. The unwritten rules about who could buy what, who was allowed to bid, whose money was welcome and whose wasn't. The art itself doesn't matter as much as the people who want it, Do-hyun explained as they walked through a gallery after hours, just the 2 of them and the nervous owner who kept wringing his hands. It's about who's buying, who's selling, who's desperate, who's showing off. Zora nodded, memorizing faces in the photographs the gallery owner showed them. Collectors. Dealers. Competitors. It was its own language, and surprisingly, she was becoming fluent. She could name a painter by their brushstrokes now. Could tell the difference between a real antiquity and a clever fake. Could spot which clients were actually interested in the art and which ones were just using it to launder money or impress their friends. You have a good eye, Do-hyun said after one meeting, when she correctly identified a forged signature on a supposedly rare print. Most people wouldn't have caught that. Coming from him, it felt like the highest praise possible. While Zora was learning to navigate the complex waters of the art world, Kendrick was thriving. With the financial pressure lifted, his school life had completely changed. He didn't have to worry about whether his sister could afford the class trip or the new textbooks or the special programs anymore. For the first time, he could just be a kid. He was making friends. Real friends. Kids who were learning sign language just to talk to him. During their video calls, his hands would fly as he signed about his day, his face lit up with a joy Zora hadn't seen in years. Something's different about you, he signed one night. You're not tired anymore. Zora smiled, her hands moving in response. I found something, Kenny. I don't know what yet. But it feels like hope. She didn't tell him exactly what she was doing. Just that she had a new job. A better one. That things were going to be easier now. The less he knew about Kang Do-hyun, the better. But amid all the changes, Zora hadn't forgotten about Franklin. She still worked at Hamel 3 nights a week, cover, as Do-hyun called it. A way to maintain her old life while building her new one. And Franklin was still acting strange. Worse, even. The shaking in his hands had gotten so bad he dropped a tray of glasses last week. His face was gray with exhaustion. He flinched at small noises, like a man expecting a blow. Zora started watching him more carefully. Staying later after her shift. Coming in early. One night, she caught him meeting someone in the alley behind the restaurant. A man in a dark coat, face hidden in the shadows. They spoke briefly. Franklin's shoulders were hunched, his body language screaming fear. The man handed him an envelope. Franklin took it with trembling fingers. Zora couldn't see the stranger's face, couldn't hear what they said. But she memorized everything else: height, build, the way he moved, the expensive watch that glinted when he reached out. She filed it away. Waited for the right moment to bring it up. As the weeks passed, something unexpected started happening. Zora found herself spending more and more time at Do-hyun's office. Not just during the day, but late into the evening. Reviewing what she'd observed. Discussing the people she'd met. Analyzing situations. And gradually, he started asking for her opinions. Not just about what she saw, but what she thought. About clients. About deals. About people. She answered honestly. Sometimes too honestly. "That collector you're meeting tomorrow," she said one night, going over files in his office while rain streaked the windows. "He's lying about the provenance of those Korean ceramics. His eyes go up and right every time he talks about where he got them. Classic tell." Do-hyun studied her across the desk. "You're sure?" "Yes. And he keeps touching his collar when you ask direct questions." Another sign. The next day, Do-hyun canceled the meeting. 3 days later, Taemin informed her they discovered the ceramics were looted from a small museum outside Seoul. The collector had been trying to use Kong Industries to legitimize stolen goods. "You were right," Do-hyun said when she arrived that evening. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. But something had shifted between them. A layer of ice had melted. Not completely, Do-hyun was still Do-hyun, remote and controlled and impossible to truly read. But he was listening to her now. Really listening. Across town, in a darkened apartment, 3 people gathered around surveillance photos spread across a table. "She's with him almost every day now," Nari said, tapping a picture of Zora entering Kong Tower. "What is he thinking?" "She's nobody. A waitress." "She's more than that now," Jun-woo replied, studying the images. "He's bringing her to meetings. Introducing her to people. She's becoming visible. And vulnerable," the third person added, sliding forward a folder. "Which means it's time." The plan was taking shape. The pieces moving into position. Zora didn't know it yet, but she was being woven into a web far larger than restaurant drama and art deals. She was becoming a piece on a chessboard, and the other players were about to make their move. Franklin left Hamel at exactly 1:37 a.m. He always stayed late on Thursdays, counting inventory, doing paperwork, making sure everything was perfect for the weekend rush. But tonight he was acting strange. More nervous than usual. Checking his watch every few minutes. Jumping at small noises. Zora was supposed to be gone by midnight. Her shift had ended at 11:30. But she'd told the other servers she wanted to deep clean her section, then slipped into the break room to wait. Something wasn't right. And tonight she was going to find out what. When Franklin finally left, locking the restaurant door behind him, Zora gave him a 30-second head start. Then she followed. He didn't take his usual route home. Instead of walking toward the subway that would take him to Queens, he headed deeper into the industrial section of the neighborhood. Past closed warehouses. Through narrow alleys between abandoned buildings. Zora stayed about half a block behind, keeping to the shadows like Taemin had taught her. Step quietly. Pause when he pauses. Use parked cars and doorways for cover. Don't stare directly at your target, your eyes catch light, even in the dark. Franklin didn't look back once. He was too focused on wherever he was going, too wrapped up in his own thoughts to notice the shadow sliding along behind him. After 15 minutes of walking, he stopped in front of a narrow staircase leading down to a basement door. A dim red light glowed above it, the only indication that this wasn't just another abandoned storefront. No sign. No name. Just red light and a steel door. Franklin glanced around once, then descended the stairs and knocked. 3 quick taps, too slow. The door opened. Light spilled out. Franklin went in. The door closed. Zora waited in the shadows, counting slowly to 60. This neighborhood wasn't safe after dark. This was the kind of place where people disappeared if they weren't careful. Where bodies got found in dumpsters days later. But she needed to know. She moved carefully to the building, crouching low, scanning for security cameras or guards. Nothing visible. She circled around to the side, where a narrow alley ran alongside the building. Found what she was looking for, a small window at ground level, grimy and cracked, looking into the basement. Zora knelt in the dirty alley, wiped a clear spot on the glass, and peered in. What she saw made her blood run cold. The basement was set up like a private club. Dim lighting. Dark wood tables. Expensive liquor bottles lining the back wall. And sitting at the center table was Franklin, but he wasn't alone. Across from him sat a man Zora didn't recognize. Young, maybe 30. Expensive suit. Hair styled perfectly. The kind of handsome that comes from money and the best doctors. And beside him, Nari Yoon. The woman who had slapped Zora. The woman whose hand still showed up in Zora's dreams sometimes. Zora pressed her ear against the crack in the window frame, trying to catch their words. The glass muffled most of it, but fragments drifted through. Running out of time. The handsome man was saying. The girl is the key. Nari's voice, sharp with hate. Do-hyun trusts her. Interpol is ready to move. The man again. Gallery opening next week. Zora strained to hear more. The handsome man was talking about art now. Shipments. Documents that needed to be planted. Something about customs forms and verification certificates. Franklin's voice broke through, cracking with emotion. I didn't want any of this. But my wife, the debt. Too late for regrets now, the man replied coldly. You're in too deep, Mr. Gaines. Nari leaned forward, her face lit from below by a small table lamp, making her look demonic. Just make sure she's there, she said. Make sure she's holding the documents when it happens. The man nodded. And once Do-hyun is in custody, his assets frozen, his reputation destroyed, my grandmother will have no choice but to reconsider her decision about the family business. The way he said, my grandmother, suddenly it clicked. This wasn't just any rich guy. This was Kang Junwoo. Do-hyun's cousin. The one who'd been passed over when their grandmother chose who would run the family empire. Zora's mind raced, putting the pieces together. They were planning something at a gallery opening next week. They were going to frame Do-hyun for smuggling. Interpol was going to be involved. And somehow, they were planning to use her. To make her hold documents, probably fake ones, that would implicate her and Do-hyun. She watched Franklin's face as the conversation continued. This man who had hired her 2 years ago. Who had shown her the ropes. Who had slipped her extra food to take home to Kendrick when money was tight. He was crying now. Silent tears streaming down his face as he nodded along to whatever Junwoo was saying. He was trapped. Gambling debt. Threats against his wife. Desperate people do desperate things. Zora knew that better than most. She felt anger bubbling up inside her, but also recognition. How many times had she almost crossed lines for Kendrick? How far would she go to protect her brother if someone threatened him? A noise from the street made her duck lower. A man in a suit, security, had to be, walked past the alley, scanning the darkness. Zora pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. He paused at the mouth of the alley. Lit a cigarette. The flame briefly illuminated his face, hard eyes, scar across one cheek. Gun holster visible under his jacket. Zora didn't move. Didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, the man walked on. She counted to 100 before daring to peek through the window again. The meeting was breaking up. Junwoo was standing. Nari was putting on her coat. Franklin looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. Time to go. Zora slipped away from the window, crept back down the alley, and ran as soon as she hit the main street. She didn't stop running until she was 5 blocks away, heart hammering in her chest, lungs burning from the cold night air. She took a circuitous route home. Changed subway lines twice. Doubled back once. Paranoid, maybe, but better safe than sorry. By the time she reached her Brooklyn apartment, it was almost 4 a.m. The sky was still dark, but with that faint grayish tint that promised dawn wasn't far off. Zora sat at her small kitchen table, silver cross clutched in her hand, thinking. She had options. She could stay silent. Take the money Do-hyun was paying her. Let him fall when Junwoo's plan played out. Disappear with Kendrick, new city, new names, new life. That was the smart play. The safe play. Or she could warn Do-hyun. Tell him everything. Step fully into his world with no way back. That was the right play. But also the dangerous one. She was still sitting there, cross in hand, when Kendrick padded out of their shared bedroom, rubbing his eyes. "Why are you awake?" he signed, his hands moving slowly with sleep. "It's so early." "I have to make a choice," Zora signed back. "And I don't know which path is right." Kendrick sat beside her, his face serious in the dim light of the kitchen. At 14, he sometimes seemed older than his years, like he'd absorbed some of their grandmother's wisdom through osmosis. "What would Grandma say?" he asked, hands moving more confidently now. Zora smiled sadly. "You know what she'd say. Do the right thing even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. So you already know." She did. She'd known all along. She just needed to hear it out loud. Kendrick took her hands in his. "Whatever you decide, I trust you." Zora hugged him tight, then stood up, decision made. She picked up her phone. Scrolled to Taemin's number. Pressed call. He answered on the first ring, voice alert despite the hour. "I need to see him," Zora said without preamble. "Right now. It's about Franklin. And the gallery opening next week. And if I'm right, someone's trying to destroy everything." Taemin didn't ask questions. Just said, "Car's on its way." 15 minutes later, Zora was in the back of a black sedan speeding toward Manhattan. She watched the city wake up around her, delivery trucks making their rounds, early shift workers waiting at bus stops, street cleaners washing away the night's debris. The car pulled up to Kong Tower just as the first real light of dawn broke over the skyscrapers. Taemin met her in the lobby. His face gave nothing away, but there was tension in his shoulders as he escorted her to the private elevator. "He's waiting," was all he said. The elevator rose smoothly, carrying her up, up, up. 68 floors. From Brooklyn Waitress to, what, exactly? Informant? Ally? Something else entirely? Whatever she was about to become, there would be no going back. And as the elevator carried her up to the top floor, Zora Pemberton, the waitress from Brooklyn who had nothing but a silver cross and a deaf brother and a grandmother's legacy of grace, was about to become the most important person in Kang Do-hyun's world. She just didn't know if that would save her or destroy her. Do-hyun didn't move when Zora finished telling him everything. He stood by the window of his office, dawn light just beginning to streak the Manhattan skyline, hands clasped behind his back. His face was a perfect mask, no anger, no surprise, no reaction at all. But his eyes. His eyes were different. Something burned there. Something cold and dangerous, like watching ice catch fire. "Show me," he said finally. Zora pulled out her phone. Handed it to him. The night before, she'd managed to take a few photos through that dirty basement window. They weren't great, blurry, dim, shot at an awkward angle, but they were clear enough. You could see Franklin's tear-streaked face. Junwoo's expensive suit. Nari's hateful smile. Do-hyun scrolled through them slowly. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. "My own cousin," he said finally. His voice was so quiet Zora had to strain to hear it. "My own blood." He set the phone down on his desk. Turned back to the window. "And Franklin." The name sounded different when he said it. Heavier. 22 years. He didn't have a choice, Zora said. She surprised herself by defending Franklin, but she couldn't help it. He's trapped. Gambling debts. Threats against his wife. They're using him. Do-hyun turned to her, eyes cold. Everyone has choices, Miss Pemberton. Even trapped animals choose which way to run. He's not evil, Zora insisted. He's just desperate. Do-hyun's voice was sharper now. That doesn't make him less dangerous. Sometimes it makes him more so. He crossed to his desk, hit a button on his phone. Taemin. Come in. The door opened almost immediately. Taemin stepped in, eyes flicking between Do-hyun and Zora, reading the tension in the room. We have a problem, Do-hyun said. For the next hour, they planned. Not hiding. Not running. Not calling off the gallery opening that was scheduled for 3 days later. We go, Do-hyun said. We attend. We let them think their plan is working. But if Interpol is involved, Zora started. Do-hyun cut her off with a small gesture. I have someone inside. The raid will be redirected. And the evidence they're planning to plant? Will lead straight back to Junwoo. A cold smile flickered across Do-hyun's face. We reverse the trap. They think they're the hunters. They're the prey. Taemin nodded, already typing notes into his tablet. What about Franklin? Leave him for now. He's more useful if he thinks his plan is still intact. The surprise on his face when everything changes will be more convincing that way. Zora's mind was spinning, trying to keep up. And me? What do you want me to do? Do-hyun turned to her. For a moment, he just looked at her, his gaze impossible to read. You'll be there, he said finally. By my side. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Something shifted in Do-hyun's eyes. Something almost human. Because they think you're a pawn, he said quietly. A piece they can move around the board at will. When you're standing beside me while their trap collapses, they'll realize you're the queen. Zora felt something catch in her chest. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them. Like he actually meant them. It was the first moment of real vulnerability she'd ever seen from him. The Deadless Gallery was the crown jewel of the Manhattan art scene. For stories of gleaming white walls and polished marble floors in a renovated Beaux-Arts building on the Upper East Side. Soaring ceilings. Dramatic lighting. The kind of space that made even mediocre art look important. Tonight, though, the art was anything but mediocre. Lost Treasures of the Joseon Dynasty, read the banner above the entrance. Inside, priceless Korean artifacts from the 14th to 19th centuries filled the display cases. Porcelain vases. Jade figurines. Delicate ink paintings on silk scrolls. Many of the pieces had never been displayed outside Korea before. And Kong Industries was the lead sponsor, which made Do-hyun the guest of honor. Zora stood in front of the mirror in a private dressing room at Kong Tower, barely recognizing herself. The dress Do-hyun had provided was midnight blue, simple but elegant. Understated enough that she didn't look like she was trying too hard, expensive enough that no one would question her presence. Her hair was swept up, her makeup subtle but flawless, Done by a professional who'd shown up at her apartment that morning, sent by Taemin. Only one thing remained the same, the silver cross at her throat. When she'd hesitated, wondering if it was too plain for such a fancy event, Do-hyun had simply said, "Keep it. It's who you are." Now she touched it gently, drawing strength from the worn metal, from the generations of strong women who had worn it before her. "Ready?" Taemin asked from the doorway. Zora took a deep breath. "Ready." By 8 p.m., the gallery was packed with New York's elite. Museum directors in bespoke suits. Socialites dripping with jewels. Critics from major art publications, already drunk on free champagne. Collectors worth billions, eyeing the displays with calculated interest. And in the center of it all, Kang Do-hyun moved through the crowd like a shark through water, smooth, powerful, feared. Zora stayed beside him, exactly as planned. She smiled when appropriate. Answered questions when asked. Kept her eyes open, her senses alert. Waiting. At 8:30, they arrived. Kang Junwoo entered like a man who already owned the place. Tailored suit. Perfect smile. A small entourage of assistants trailing behind him. And on his arm, wearing a blood-red dress that clung to every curve, was Nari Yoon. They spotted Do-hyun and Zora immediately. Junwoo's smile faltered for just a second. Nari's eyes narrowed with hate. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Zora wasn't supposed to be standing beside Do-hyun. She was supposed to be off somewhere, holding incriminating documents, setting herself up to take the fall. But there she was, in her midnight blue dress with her silver cross, calmly sipping champagne like she belonged. "Keep smiling," Do-hyun murmured, his lips barely moving. "They're coming over." Sure enough, Junwoo was making his way through the crowd toward them, Nari in tow. "Cousin." His voice was warm, his smile broad. Like they were the best of friends. Beautiful event. Grandmother would be proud. "I'm sure she would," Do-hyun replied, his tone neutral. Junwoo turned to Zora, curiosity and calculation in his eyes. "And who is this lovely lady? I don't believe we've met." "This is Zora Pemberton," Do-hyun said. "My cultural liaison." "Cultural liaison?" Junwoo repeated, his smile never slipping. "That's unexpected." "She sees things clearly," Do-hyun said. "More clearly than family sometimes." The smile remained on Junwoo's face, but his eyes hardened. He understood the message. Nari didn't bother hiding her disdain. She looked Zora up and down, lip curled slightly. "I remember you," she said. "The waitress with the necklace. You're certainly moving up in the world." Zora met her gaze calmly. "Nice to see you again, Miss Yoon." "You don't belong here, little waitress," Nari whispered, leaning in like she was sharing a secret. "Playing dress-up doesn't change what you are." "And yet here I am," Zora replied, her voice steady as stone. Strange how that works. At precisely 9 p.m., the gallery doors opened again. A group of men and women in dark suits entered. Professional. Serious. Moving with purpose. Junwoo saw them first. A smile of satisfaction spread across his face. He stepped slightly away from Do-hyun, as if distancing himself from what was about to happen. "Right on time," he murmured to Nari. The agents moved through the crowd. Heading straight for Junwoo. His smile collapsed into confusion as the lead agent stopped directly in front of him. "Kang Junwoo?" the agent asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes?" Junwoo looked past the agent, toward Do-hyun, eyes wild with sudden understanding. "What is the meaning of this?" The agent pulled out a badge. "Interpol. You're under arrest for international art smuggling, document forgery, and criminal conspiracy." "This is absurd." Junwoo's voice rose, drawing attention from across the gallery. "I'm not, you can't, he's the one you want." He jabbed a finger at Do-hyun. But the agent was already reading him his rights as two others moved to flank him. Nari tried to back away, to disappear into the crowd. But Taemin was there, suddenly, his hand firm on her arm. "I think you should stay, Miss Yoon," he said quietly. "There are some questions about your involvement." The crowd was buzzing now. Phones out. Whispers racing. The art world loved nothing more than a scandal, and this one was unfolding in real time right in front of them. Evidence materialized, documents, communications, shipping records. All pointing to an elaborate smuggling operation run by Junwoo. Not Do-hyun. All the evidence they had planned to use against Do-hyun, now flipped and pointing back at them. "This is a setup," Junwoo shouted as the agents led him toward the door. "My cousin is framing me. This isn't real." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence was too solid. Too convincing. Just like he had planned for Do-hyun. In the chaos, Zora spotted Franklin. He stood against the wall, watching everything unfold with wide eyes. Relief and shame battled on his face. She made her way over to him. "I'm sorry, child," he whispered when she reached him. "I never wanted." "I know." Zora touched his arm gently. "Do-hyun paid off your debt. All of it. Your wife's retirement is safe." Franklin's eyes filled with tears. "Why would he do that?" "Because I asked him to." Zora squeezed his arm. "But you have to leave the city, Franklin. Tonight. Start fresh somewhere else." He nodded, tears streaming down his face now. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." "I know she would," Zora said softly. "That's why I couldn't let you fall." The gallery cleared quickly after the arrests. No one wanted to stick around for the aftermath, except for the reporters who hovered outside like vultures, waiting for statements. Do-hyun handled it all with his usual cool efficiency. Just the right amount of shock about his cousin's betrayal. Just the right amount of cooperation with the authorities. Through it all, Zora stayed beside him. The queen on the chessboard. The waitress who changed everything. As the police escorted Junwoo past them toward the waiting cars, Nari, still firmly in Taemin's grip, twisted around to spit one final curse. "This isn't over, little waitress." But Zora didn't flinch. She'd taken worse blows. And she was still standing. 1 week after the gallery showdown, life had shifted again. The headlines were everywhere. Kang Junwoo arrested in international art smuggling scandal. The business pages couldn't get enough of it. A respected art dealer, heir to one of Korea's oldest family businesses, caught red-handed trying to smuggle priceless artifacts. And Do-hyun? His name was barely mentioned, except as the wronged cousin who'd helped authorities uncover the scheme. His reputation wasn't just intact, it was stronger than ever. The legitimate side of Kang Industries saw stock prices climbing as investors gained confidence. The shadowy side, well, that ran smoother too, though nobody talked about that part. Zora watched it all unfold from a strange new position. Not quite an outsider anymore, but not fully on the inside either. Somewhere in between, with one foot in each world. She still worked at Hamel 2 nights a week, for appearances, Do-hyun had said, though she suspected he knew she wasn't ready to leave that part of her life behind completely. But now everyone treated her differently. The servers bowed their heads slightly when she passed. The kitchen staff saved the best food for her breaks. Even the customers seemed to sense that something had changed, though they couldn't quite put their finger on what. The girl with the silver cross wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was something else. Something more. Nari Yoon was gone. That's what Taemin told Zora when she asked. Just, gone. No charges filed. Do-hyun had made sure of that, not out of mercy but because a trial would bring unwanted attention. Instead, Nari had been exiled. Not just from New York, but from any city where Do-hyun had connections, which was most of them. Stripped of her social standing. Cut off from the powerful friends who'd once welcomed her. Last seen boarding a private plane to somewhere far away. Will she be back? Zora had asked. Tamin's face remained expressionless. Not if she wants to live. The word sent a chill down Zora's spine. A reminder of exactly what world she was now part of. Franklin came to see her 3 days after the gallery. Zora was surprised when he knocked on her apartment door. She hadn't expected to ever see him again. He looked different already, the constant tremor in his hands was gone. The hunted look in his eyes had faded. He stood straighter, like a man who'd put down a heavy burden after carrying it too long. "I'm leaving tonight," he said, standing awkwardly in her tiny living room. "Heading south. Starting over." "I'm glad," Zora said, and meant it. "You deserve a fresh start." Franklin nodded, then reached into his bag and pulled out a battered old book. The cover was faded, the spine cracked from years of use. He held it out to her. "My grandmother's cookbook," he said. "Southern recipes, passed down through the family. For when you need to remember where you came from." Zora took it carefully, touched by the gesture. "Where will you go?" "Charlotte. My wife's sister has a place. We'll be okay." Franklin's eyes were damp. 22 years at Hamel. "And I threw it all away over some stupid bets." "You made a mistake," Zora said gently. "We all do." "Not you." Franklin shook his head. "You did the right thing, even when it would have been easier not to." Zora thought about how close she'd come to staying silent. How tempting it had been to just take the money and run. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But you did. And that's what matters." Franklin opened his arms, and Zora stepped into them. "Your grandmother would be so damn proud of you, girl." They held each other for a moment, a goodbye, but also a forgiveness. 22 years of a life, closed and started again. Kendrick was thriving. His new school had resources Zora could never have afforded before. Speech therapy. Advanced technology. Teachers who actually knew how to work with deaf students. He was making friends. Real friends, not just kids who tolerated him. His grades were improving. He'd even joined the robotics club. But the biggest change was his confidence. He walked taller now. Smiled more. Signed with a fluidity and enthusiasm that made Zora's heart ache with happiness. "You're different," he signed one night as they sat on the couch, watching a movie with subtitles. "Bigger somehow." "I don't feel bigger," Zora signed back. "I just feel, like me." Maybe for the first time. Kendrick studied her face. He'd always been good at reading people, better than most hearing folks, because he'd spent his whole life watching expressions, body language, the things people didn't say out loud. "You're not scared anymore," he signed. "That's it." Zora hadn't realized it until he pointed it out, but he was right. The constant fear that had been her companion for so many years, fear of not having enough, fear of letting Kendrick down, fear of losing everything, was gone. She pulled her brother into a hug. He was the only person in the world who remembered their grandmother's laugh. The only one who shared her memories, her history, her blood. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. "Miss Pemberton." Dohian's voice, as composed as ever. "I need you to come to an address." He gave her a location in Harlem. No explanation. No details. Just an address and a time. Zora had learned not to ask questions. She just said she'd be there. When she arrived, she found an old brownstone on a quiet street. Nothing fancy, but solid. Well kept. The kind of building that had stood for 100 years and would stand for 100 more. She climbed the steps, knocked on the door. No answer. She tried the handle. It turned. Inside, she found herself in a warmly lit hallway. Polished wood floors. Brick walls painted a soft cream color. Photos lining the walls, community events, children in school uniforms, families standing proudly in front of new homes. At the end of the hall was an open door. A sign beside it read, "The Hannah Kong Foundation." Zora stepped inside and found Do-hyun waiting. He stood by the window, looking out at the street. But unlike the cold, distant figure who usually stared down at Manhattan from his tower, this Do-hyun seemed different. More present. More human. "My grandmother's name was Hannah," he said without turning. "She built our family from nothing. Came to America with $10 and a jade pendant. Worked 3 jobs. Saved every penny." Zora said nothing. Just waited. "Before she died, she asked me to create something that would last beyond business. Beyond power." Now he did turn, and his eyes held something Zora had never seen before. Something that would help people like she had once been helped. "A foundation," Zora said softly. Do-hyun nodded. $50 million. For education. Community development. Scholarships for children like your brother. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. Small. Silver. Ordinary looking. "I need someone to run it," he said. "Someone who understands what it means to struggle. Someone who knows the difference between charity and opportunity." He paused. "Someone I trust." He held out the key. Zora stared at it. Such a small thing to represent something so enormous. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because 3 weeks ago, you could have stayed silent," Do-hyun said. "You could have taken the money and disappeared. Instead, you risked everything to warn me." His eyes held hers. "That tells me who you are." Slowly, Zora reached out and took the key. It felt heavier than it looked. "And if I take this," she said, "what are we? What is this thing between us?" For once, the ghost seemed almost uncertain. A flicker of vulnerability crossed his face. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "I've never trusted anyone this quickly. It's unfamiliar. For me too." They stood in the quiet office, afternoon light streaming through old windows. 2 people from completely different worlds. A waitress from Brooklyn with a silver cross and a legacy of dignity. A businessman from Korea with a jade pendant and an empire of shadows. United by betrayal, trust, and something neither was ready to name. The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then the front door banged open, shattering the silence. "Zora." Kendrick's voice, too loud, the way deaf people sometimes speak when excited. He burst into the office, Taemin following behind with an apologetic look. Kendrick stopped short when he saw Do-hyun. Straightened up. Tried to look proper. Then he saw the office. The photos. The foundation sign. His eyes went wide. "Is this real?" he signed, hands flying with excitement. Zora smiled, her own hands moving in response. "I think so. I think this is where we're supposed to be." Kendrick turned to Do-hyun. Studied him carefully, the way he always evaluated new people. Then his hands moved, deliberately slow so Zora could translate if needed. "Thank you." Do-hyun looked at Zora. "What did he say?" "He said thank you." Something shifted in Do-hyun's face. A softening. A crack in the armor he'd worn for so long. "Tell him he's welcome," he said quietly. "Tell him," he paused, and for the first time, his voice caught slightly, "tell him I also know what it's like to be saved by a grandmother." And that's the story. A waitress who got slapped for spilling wine. A mafia boss who set down his glass for the first time in 8 years. A woman who prayed for herself instead of crying. And a world that changed because one person refused to break. Now look, if this story did something for you, if you felt something, if you're sitting there with that feeling in your chest, this is the moment. I put real time into these stories. Real heart. And all I'm asking is that if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, just tap that button. It takes 1 second. But it means the world. Smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Tell me if you saw yourself in Zora. Tell me what your grandmother taught you. Tell me whatever's on your heart. I'll see you in the next story.